Hello. It's been a while since I do an interview because I've been moving around. I moved to Puerto Rico. I have been completely changing my life and going down rabbit holes that are very exciting. And as I see the future moving forward into a more virtual experience, a more online presence where, some of us exist more online than we do in person, I'm starting to consider, I want to make sure that we don't forget about accessibility as we move into this new future. It's really important that we understand where things are moving and understand the opportunities that we have today to make sure that that future that is inevitable, whether we like it or not, make sure that that future is as accessible to everybody, and not just in language, but in availability and making sure that people have access to knowing what's going on. So in order for us to be able to communicate the future better and the present, we need to make sure that we make our content accessible. Enter Tim Kerbavaz. Yes.
That's it.
I met Tim at a Silicon Valley video producers thing, actually online. I've never met Tim in person. And I was like, he was talking about captioning and accessibility of content. And I was like, I'm really into that as well. And we started geeking out because he had also done some work for Google, some work, which maybe we'll discuss today. And we just come from the same corporate video world / broadcast / art. So Tim, I'm very happy to bring you on. I just want to have this conversation with you. I think you have so many nuggets of wisdom. And can you, I don't know, you want to is it awkward for you to give your elevator pitch about who you are right now?
I can say it. So I'm Tim Kerbavaz. I am a technical producer. I am the owner of Talent Audiovisual. I work in many capacities. I wear many hats, but all of them are at the core translating client needs and vision into technical reality. And one of those areas that I specialize in that is perhaps more unusual than the others is this accessibility space, where one of the areas of specialty that I have professionally is really helping both end clients and production companies build accessibility workflows, whether that's for live captioning or ASL or language interpretation, and really kind of making sure that events that are really targeting a global audience really are heard or seen by that global audience.
Right. So this is very interesting because you're looking at what are the different accessibility considerations that you have in mind? Like what are the different I don't want to say boxes to check, but you have a list of things that you want to make sure that you address. What's that list?
So I want to start this by kind of telling a story, and this is I'm fairly active in like AV Twitter, which is like a weird, super hyper specific thing in Twitter. But one of the things that came up in a discussion was actually a sort of peek into disability Twitter, which is a different aspect of Twitter, and this kind of crossover. There was a group discussion amongst a bunch of disabled folks about how virtual events are basically something that they have been asking for years, the ability to attend an event online. And that serves many people for many reasons, not just because someone might have the ability to have captions. You can have captions in person as well, of course, but for intersecting reasons, it's super important to disabled communities to have the ability to attend events online. And some of those reasons might be financial accessibility, right? The ability to pay to attend or pay to travel to events. Many folks who are on disability assistance, are basically not allowed to have wealth. Like they're basically not allowed to have money and still get government assistance. And so, they can't afford to travel to an event. The airplane ticket would be, their whole monthly allowance or income. For folks who are, single parents and can't leave their kids for a week, but want to participate in an event, right? They can attend and participate in conversations remotely. For folks who are working and can't get away from their job for a whole week, but could attend a couple sessions to participate, right? Maybe they can attend your event, and as we get back to sort of disability, online we have the ability to incorporate things like captioning and audio description and sign language, and even something as simple as being able to replay the event, right? For someone who, for whatever reason isn't going to be able to attend the event from start to finish, the ability to watch later with captions, or at even changing the speed, they can slow down or speed up the event. For someone who, for any number of reasons, whether that's reasons of time or neurodiversity or accessibility, disability, or just, like I said, their kids, you got to put the kid down for a nap. They can't watch it till the kid's asleep, The ability to time shift is really improving the ability for so many people to participate in all sorts of events for all sorts of topics. And so I think it's really, when we think about accessibility, it's not just captions or sign language or audio descriptions. It's really thinking about what are all of the possible ways that our audience could interact with the event, and how can we make sure that an audience can interact in really any way that works best for them, and not necessarily in just the way that works best for me.
Right. At Google, they have the NBU, working towards the NBU, which is the next billion users. And how do you access the next billion users? The next billion users are the people that you just described, the single parents, the people that can't escape, where they're at because they have responsibilities or they have limitations, they have sick loved ones that they need to take care of. I mean, I can think of so many reasons why people can't attend physically. And I think it doesn't mean that physical events are going to go away, because some of us are going to be starving for human contact. And so we're going to be like, yes, we're going to go to but then the experience is going to be a lot different. And I might not be able to go to all of them. So suddenly today, a conversation that's happening in Australia, I can suddenly tap into that. And I can be like, you can also get your feet wet. You can start meeting people in that area, in that zone. You start really understanding, is there opportunity for my business there? So we are connecting the world. Virtual events are only going to explode. But with that, what I see happening is accessibility. Because of the speed at which we're creating content, accessibility is just going out the window. And I am guilty of that as well, because, I'll create a video and I'm like, oh, I don't have time to caption it and then upload it, and so I'll just upload it. So I'm definitely guilty of that too. But with my clients and the people that I work with, what we have discovered by doing pre-recorded live events is that because we do the recording 2 weeks before or 3 weeks before, we have time to caption it and translate it and really make sure that that video, this conversation that we're having right now in English, can be translated into 5 languages, so that when somebody in Brazil can listen to us talking, even if we don't speak the same language. I mean, talk about access, language is also a limitation as well.
And I was going to say that. I mean, one of the things, those audiences I didn't mention, is your international audiences. And when you talk about the next billion users, and for Google particularly, right, those users are not in the US, a lot of them, right? There's audiences in Brazil. There's audiences in the Middle East, in India. There's developers in all of those places, right? In terms of a lot of these events that are targeting people who are building products on top of any number of tech companies' suites of products, those developers are often not in the US, and many of them are not English as a first language speakers. And so the ability to provide translation, interpretation, and even just English captions for someone who may speak English as a second language, where it's just easier to follow along. Like, you're providing so much more value to so many more people and reaching such a bigger audience, and maybe for some, hyper-local organization, reaching people in Brazil doesn't matter, but for companies on the scale of Google, that's incredibly important to reach that growth, because they're pretty much tapped out. Like, everyone in the US has heard of Google,
Right, exactly. And that, I find that beautiful, because then now we're extending an opportunity to create products and create wealth coming from areas of the world that didn't previously have access to that. But now, because they have access to the internet and they have access to hardware that connects them to that, and there's broadband to make that go faster, you now can be a digital nomad. You now can just plug into the Wi-Fi and you are set. I am that person. Right now I'm recording using Riverside FM. This is a cloud-based recording tool. I'm using a webcam. I can be doing this from anywhere. Yes, this looks like a studio, but while I was a digital nomad, I did it throughout my Airbnbs, and some places had echo and some places sucked. But like, we have already entered into this future. It's
Right.
already happening. There's no stopping it. And I would say, so Tim, what with that in mind, how do you see with this hyper fast work? So yes, we talked about pre-recorded stuff, but not everything can be pre-recorded.
Yeah.
What can be done in events when you have to provide that accessibility live? Are you looking at
Right.
scripts beforehand, or how are you addressing the live market?
Yeah. So I mean, the best way in terms of quality and fidelity, in terms of accuracy to produce captions, at least for live events, is to have a human stenographer. And a human stenographer, stenography is essentially the written language that's used by court reporters. It's based on phonemes, essentially like the sounds of a word and not necessarily the spelling. And it's typed in chords, like a piano keyboard, where you press multiple keys and they represent a set of sounds together that represent a word. And so it's something where they can sort of play the keys like a piano and transcribe
Wow.
something really quickly. And so in court reporting, that's done and then sort of translated after the fact, or they can like edit the transcript after the fact. With captioning, that's done live and published live, so there's sort of no second chance. Once it goes live, it's on air.
Right.
In terms of the technology behind that, the technique of the stenography is a quite old discipline. It's a trained, certified discipline.
Yeah.
In terms of the technologies around that make that possible for the web, they're constantly evolving. Obviously, there's also ASR products, automatic speech recognition products that use robots to transcribe stuff, and Google makes a pretty good ASR product, and Microsoft and IBM all have their own ASR products. And I will say in the last 2 years, they have gone from being pretty much unusable and worse than nothing to what I think now is pretty much a sort of an okay option if you have no better option. Basically, like suddenly, like I think it is. I think they are better than nothing at this point, and I still
Right.
think
Yes.
real captions are better. Human captions are better if you can afford it. But if the option is human captions or ASR, choose human captions. If the option is ASR or nothing, I would say choose ASR. Whereas 2 years ago, I would have said choose nothing, because it used to be worse than nothing, because it was just confusing, right?
Yeah.
But in terms
So
of captioning specific, I mean, did you want me to talk about other areas of accessibility and kind of how we conceive of that on a production level, or?
I'm going to tell you a story, and I want you to just tell me
Okay.
your impression of the story.
Sure.
So I went to an accessibility conference at Google, and that's actually where I met Kyle, which is one of the producers over in Seattle, or not Seattle, but in Microsoft in Washington. And the people from, I think, Caption Max were there. Don't quote me on this, but I think it was Caption Max. They were there. They were one of the big ones. And they were describing also not just the voice. They played a scene, and they said, okay, we're going to put in all of the captions. That is just what people are saying. And then now we're going to add audio description. So we watched a scene with just without any audio. We watched a scene reading everything, just the dialogue. And then we watched that scene again with the audio description. And with the audio description, it actually changed the entire. They obviously picked a good clip, right? Because
Right,
it
right.
changed the mood and everything. But it was so interesting because when it comes to filmmaking, I know we've been talking a lot about, live events, and with live events, it's normally very hot, it's pretty dry. It's a talking head. It's usually pretty technical. So, it makes sense to just translate that very quickly. But when we shift gears a little bit into the entertainment industry, and we start looking at, the music intensifies, the door creaks, that kind of audio description. How do you see that playing into a live space? Can that happen?
Right.
Can we have a live experience where there's audio description about what's going on around a person in a digital world?
I would say yes, and I would clarify two things. One, closed captioning in particular does include any text description of any sound, any audible content. So closed captioning is specifically a textual representation of any audio that includes nonverbal sounds. Two, audio description is actually a different thing. So that term refers to spoken description for someone who's blind. So that is another area of accessibility we can get into. But in terms of for captioning specifically, when you're looking at a film, right? There's a distinction between captions and subtitles. And this is different. The UK uses these terms differently, but in the US, subtitles are just the words spoken, and typically they're just like translated. So the film is in Spanish and the subtitles are in English.
Exactly.
And they're just translating the words said, but with the assumption that the audience is a hearing audience and can hear that the doorbell rang and the door creaked as it opened. Captions are really designed for an audience that cannot hear. And so for a deaf audience, it is super important to note that the doorbell rang or the door creaked, because like, why did everyone suddenly stand up? Like, it makes no sense unless you know that the doorbell rang, right? And so I would say, that is literally part of the definition of captioning. Certainly at a corporate event, there's not a whole lot of stuff that's necessarily when it's just somebody giving a slide presentation. But I think particularly when it comes to something like a demo, right? If we're doing a live demo on stage and, this box on stage, this black box that is the new product, is doing something and it makes a noise, it is actually really important for that noise to be transcribed as part of the caption, because again, right, like this box does a thing, and how does someone who can't hear know that it did anything if what it does is make noise?
Yeah. Yes. Wow. Yeah. Or like the music, whether it's upbeat or whether it's like what a violin plays. It evokes a very different feeling. Wow.
One of the things. Go ahead. Yeah. Oh, so one of the things I've been doing is when I make like little promo, like, B-roll videos of events I've done. And one of the things I've started doing is in the captions, most of them have no spoken words. It's just background music. But what I've started doing is like captioning, like, oh, here's the like synth arpeggio, like just like kind of playing with the captions, because just kind of describing so that someone who's deaf can like actually kind of get like the humor in the music. Yeah. Exactly. Like, oh, like this moment happens and there was a funny thing, like I timed it to the song, but like if you're deaf, you don't know that the song exactly. So like and like the music is often really like silly or like over the top. Like I do these like orchestral scores for like when it's like like setting up like a conference. So having that, and I've actually had deaf friends like comment on that like, oh, like you've been like watching these. There's an artist who's done some of that work, and I like, oh, you've been watching her video. I'm like, oh yeah.
Oh my god, that's awesome. That's why I want to have these conversations, because unfortunately, when you don't have a disability, you don't really think about the world through the eyes of somebody with a disability. When suddenly you have had surgery, or you have somebody in your family, or somebody with a disability, you're like, why hasn't anybody done anything about this? Like, you're like, what? You're outraged. But I'd love for there to be like a middle ground where you're not completely oblivious and you're also not outraged, and you just understand that that's normal to be thinking about accessibility. Like, I want my kids to be thinking about, how are you communicating to everyone? Because I believe that moving into the future, we're going to niche down so much into these like little communities of one thing that we have in common, but we're completely different people, like, I'm a mom. I live in Puerto Rico. You're a single guy living in California. Like, we are very different people, yet we have these micro communities that are very powerful, and we help each other with our our businesses, and we share references, and like it's a very strong community what we're building online. And to be thinking with, okay, well then how can we make this more accessible? Make sure that question is always on the back of my mind, no matter what I'm doing. If it's a product, if it's a conversation, how are we making it more accessible so that we can bring in more of the right kind of people that might look a little different into the pool?
Yeah. And part of that is just the understanding that people move through the world differently than we do, and that my experience is not the same as your experience, and it's not the same as my friend in Portland's experience. And so part of that is understanding some basics of kind of how we can make things more accessible, but part of that is understanding that we're not going to get it all right all the time, and that making space for those people to tell us, hey, I need you to do this differently, and to say, to give space in our communities for folks who are not getting their needs met to reach out and say, hey, can we try this instead? Because it would help me better participate in your community. And being able to have space for those voices and being able to actually respond and provide what they need to make, them feel included is, I think, two really key things, that actually listening and that actually following through is super important. And for, those of us who are working on sort of community projects on our own that are not sort of monetized, there's certainly like questions of like, there's limitations based on budget. But I think once you're a company building a community around your product, it is super important to really actually be listening to your user base, to your customer base, to your audience, and really actually following through when they ask for things. Because I hear from so many disabled folks that they are not heard, that when they ask for things, they're brushed aside, and that their needs are not understood even when they explain them explicitly, right? People who are, like in buildings where there's not a ramp, and like, or the ramp is behind a locked gate, or, where, they, aren't able to, convince someone to caption events or caption videos, just even things that are like seemingly fundamental that, those of us who have any knowledge of the accessibility space are like, yeah, you should do that, are really hard for folks, as they navigate our events and the world. And so I feel like it's really important to like actually listen to folks and then actually like do the things they ask us to do, because otherwise it's pretty disingenuous, right?
I mean, yes. I mean, why ask if you're not going to do something
Right.
about it? But I mean, I think that there's a lot of workflow. A lot of things just fall into the workflow, because these workflows are so long across so many different people that then a few balls are dropped, and it's just kind of like an exponential ripple effect.
Totally.
Because I've seen it. I've seen all these things happen.
Yeah, totally.
But I would love to have an accessibility check-in or a virtual event check-in with you regularly, because as we talk today, we would have had a completely different conversation a year ago.
Oh,
Things
totally.
were completely, and I mean, a year ago, let's say we're now July 23. So maybe a year ago we would have been like talking about capture cards and all that. And today we still ended up talking about capture cards. But like,
we did, actually.
Very different, but it's a very different world, And I want to make sure that as video producers and as people that are creating events that are meant to be consumed by the NBU, the next billion users, let's make sure that we do it right, And so thank you for the check-in today. Let's leave it here. And thank you for being my guest.
Thank you for having me. I'll see you next time.
Bye.